Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. So yeah, so Great People. Our product, our platform is known as Afogata, and while we deal with user feedback, of course, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to. I'm going to talk a bit more generally how, as product managers, we can use user and customer feedback, how we can use it and integrate it into our product decision making in a really viable way. And I think it's an interesting topic because. Um, it's not trivial, and we wanna get a few things kind of, if we can. We don't have a long time for this talk, so my goal, like for this short talk, is really just to kind of plan the idea of how you can use user feedback and how it could be meaningful and can move the needle, and how can you actually work with it, because there's definitely challenges involved. We're going to look at a few hurdles and a few issues that are, maybe stopping you from doing that today, and maybe some ways that you could overcome them. And really, the goal is to be actionable, right? So get some ideas rolling, so anyone, on any budget can really start incorporating that into their process in a way that works for them. And hopefully, we manage to get all that done in the short time that we have. And I thank everyone for joining. And if you have questions, of course, feel free to post them. I would love to address any and all questions. I think it would be very helpful to have a discussion. And let's get started. So I think a good place to start thinking about this is, first of all, a lot of obviously, I'm sure every product manager on this call, on this webinar, has tools that they use already, right? So probably product analytics, I'm guessing, most everyone uses. There's a lot of other stuff that may be in place, right? Maybe you have a customer advisory board, which is really great to have. Some people do focus groups, maybe becoming a bit more rare, but still definitely done it. Many good companies. If you have a brand monitoring tool, then it's actually pretty unique. I don't think a lot of product managers use that. That's pretty good, but some companies and some teams do use it to some extent, maybe directly or maybe indirectly. They have other stakeholders that provide them with reports, for example. And I will mention personas, and I don't want to talk too much about that, mainly because I think personas as a model has a lot of weaknesses. But we have all these things that give us some kind of view, some kind of reflection of user behavior, of course, but also maybe user sentiment or how people perceive our product or things like that. So the question is really, I think, why would you want to look at user feedback directly? And we're going to address that. And I think if we really look at all these things that we have, they're really great tools, they are important, but they're not reflecting to us the feedback of our own users who actually use the product directly. Maybe they're reflecting a model, right? Or like personas. It's a model. It's not, maybe it's based off of actual users or actual people, but it's still a model. It's not, the map is not the territory, right? It's not reality. Focus groups can give us a great sample. It can give us maybe very useful, in-depth feedback, but still they're not our users who are actually experiencing the product day to day necessarily, and it's not in real time, right? And it's something you can do only very occasionally. So really, it's not replacement for direct user feedback. Customer advisory board, that's great, but again, that's probably your most engaged customers, very thoughtful customers. And lastly, product analytics. It gives us the behavior, it gives us the what. Super important. I don't think any product manager would want or should go without it, but it reflects the behavior, not necessarily the reasoning or the thinking behind it, right? So that's the idea. Even when we have all these tools, and of course there are other things that I didn't mention here, but there is a lot of value in getting the direct user feedback. Now, before we talk how to do that, I want to talk about why actually not to use customer or user feedback, right? And there's actually great reasons, and I think um, a lot of product managers, a lot of people who I talk to in various organizations, and really, I don't know who we have on this call and what their practices are, obviously, and I would love to hear that. But I talk to a lot of product managers who are, top-notch professionals in really great world-class companies, and they don't really use customer feedback directly. And obviously, they have very good reasons, right? And not only because it's tricky. And the first is, sometimes it's just a vocal minority, right? Oh, I'm sure anyone here at least heard perhaps someone else say it if they did not think about that themselves, right? Oh, this thing that we hear, it's just a bunch of people who are super vocal, they're very online or whatever. They're not really reflecting the user behavior because, look, I'm looking at the analytics and it doesn't reflect what, all these complaints are about, right? So that's one thing, one major thing. Secondly, is the idea that really user feedback can really teach you something new, right? Because people complain about the same thing. Like anyone who has, I'm just giving examples, but let's say if you have an ad monetized app, or if you have a free to play game, or all these things that involve ads or payments or things like that, people will always complain about them, right? So a lot of people have the view that like, hey, I look at it, I read reviews or whatever. If people are complaining about those things, of course they will complain about them. It's not really signal. I understand why they're saying that, but it's nothing, nothing that really should drive our decision making or that we can do much about. And the third big reason is, that kind of the idea is that it's all really just fluff. Okay, I try to read some reviews, but if you can't really quantify it, someone said something, maybe it even sounds intelligent, it's a good point, but what does it really mean? It reflects one person's opinion, and it's, and in order to get even those good opinions or those like valid feedbacks, you have to sift through so much fluff, so much even like garbage in certain cases. There's definitely a lot of noise. So again, it's a very good reason why perhaps user feedback is not incorporated into your processes or into process of other really great companies or product managers that you know. Now, I think if we talk about actually using it, it's important to think how user feedback fits into the overall methodology, right? And while I didn't want to go with a specific methodology, there's a lot of, there's several at least good product management methodologies of, how you plan your roadmap and how what drives decisions and all of that. So I didn't want to be too specific here. Um, my point is really that user feedback is not one thing. It's not just like, oh, let's do our strategy and product roadmap and whatever, the way that we do it, that's our methodology. But let's see if users are complaining about whatever, about bugs, right? Or they talking about our competitors, or it's something that, or that they only look at it in the context of a user acquisition strategy or things like that, right? Or let's only look at it in the concept, in the context of user satisfaction. Like we're going to measure CSAT and we want to see that people are happy in general. So all these things, are valid, but really, all these things and other, including the strategy and even the mission of what you're doing, right? Probably the mission that you, as a product manager, as a project, as a company, have, the mission is ultimately about serving people in one way or another, right? That's what we all do. So probably what people have to say about the way that you're serving them is meaningful. So the user feedback can fit in really any of those contexts, any of those stages, or any of those drivers for your strategy. And it's not one thing, and that's really the point. The user feedback can definitely affect strategy, even affect the mission, or show you that perhaps we have this mission, but we're not in complete alignment with it yet. So that's why it can be quite a good thing to integrate into our process in a way that can affect things across the board. It's not just one corner; it's really all around. Okay, so if I've convinced you, or if you're already convinced, you think, okay, maybe if I incorporate some user feedback into my process, it could be useful. What about those issues that we just saw, right? The fluff, the noise, the vocal minorities, all that stuff. What do you do about them? So let's try to look at them and see if we can find together some useful ways to address them, right? And to deal with user feedback in a constructive way, despite the challenges it presents that are definitely real challenges. So let's start, from the first one, the vocal minority issue, right? And that's like, okay, this, hopefully people know this meme. It's basically someone who's, everything is because of the aliens, right? So it's the same people. It's the same vocal minority. It's those users who are always saying that. I'm ignoring that. It's not meaningful. It's nothing. So it's definitely, to be very, very clear, it's a very real concern. I think for many products, you would have specific audiences, specific groups of users that may or may not even represent the users that you're actually are meant to serve, or that are your best users, or that you have product market fit for. And those users may have feedback that is not really something that you want to act on. It's not in line with your strategy. Maybe they shouldn't even be there, quote unquote, because your product is not meant for them, or whatever it may be. Or maybe they're just a small group that doesn't really reflect your audience at large. And I can give I'm sure people here have examples for what they experienced. I can give you an example from like I had in my previous company. We had apps where you had a discussion function, right? And it wasn't the main goal of the apps. It was kind of something that was added to create engagement, and it worked really well. The problem is that in some cases, because it was kind of it was present in a lot of different communities, and in some cases you would have those people who would just really enjoy a very abrasive style of conversations. And I don't know if anyone dealt with online discussions, but it can be hell, right? But those there are certain people who really enjoy that kind of interaction, but most people, especially the people who are not necessarily participating, they don't like to observe that. They're not seeking that necessarily. So the vocal minority is very real. Like, how would you give those people an outlet if you at all want to give them an outlet? Or maybe the people who want to have abrasive discussion, you want to just drive them off completely. You don't want them there. So that's a separate question. But the point is really there are these vocal minorities, and you need to take into account whether the feedback is coming from them or not. So the first thing that I would say, and I think not always do we see that kind of thinking, is that the feedback channels in your community, whether it's in the product or outside of the product, are actually product too. They're part of how people experience your product, right? So this is a thing that sometimes, we manage a product and we think, okay, I'm building whatever it is, right? This service, this app, this SaaS application, whatever it may be. So this is your product. This is what I'm making decisions about. It's true, but the way that your users are experiencing it, or your customers, they're experiencing it from the first moment that they're considering to use something like that, right? Or they have a question and they go online, they seek an answer, or whatever it is. So those things, in a way, are part of your overall experience of the product. So if you don't have a supportive community, for example, and maybe you should have, of course, it depends exactly what your product is, but this is something to think about. Maybe you want to build a community that you own. Maybe you want to have a Discord server, which is a great solution. It's and not only, I mean, of course, classically for gaming or things like that, but definitely not only for that. Maybe you want to have a Discord server for your users. Maybe you want to build those feedback channels in the app or in the product, wherever it may be, in a way that's contextual and really low friction, and would get you those useful feedbacks that you can act on. And the way people provide feedback, the way people experience your product and experience the other users and can ask questions and provide feedback and share their pains. Whether like I said, a Discord community, or maybe there's a subreddit of users, maybe a subreddit of users that your users created, and you don't even have presence there. And it sounds weird, but it's actually the case for a lot of companies, a lot of products. There's like communities are online, and they're not even participating there necessarily. And this is kind of a shame, because even though you can't really control that, you can participate, you can steer, sometimes you can build communities that you own. And that experience of people sharing feedback, asking questions, being in a constructive environment is part of the product experience at large. So definitely something to think about. And I think actually can be done at a pretty low cost. Very interesting things can be done, right? So that's the first thing. If you kind of think, if you design this thing as a whole, if you design your community, you can also get more useful conversations, more useful feedback beyond that vocal minority that will always complain about something, whatever it is in your product's case. So that's the first point here, right? The first way to address it's very important. And the second thing is to really have, and we'll talk a bit about that. And really, it's not about having a specific tool, right? It's about having a way to get the data, whatever it may be, right? Maybe it's App Store reviews, maybe it's incoming messages in your ticketing system, whatever it is. And you can use very primitive things, right? You can use, whatever, a Google spreadsheet, whatever it is that you want to use. You don't have to buy a specialized tool, but it's important to stratify and really apply rigor in your analysis. And maybe you want to get all those feedbacks that are kind of like, oh, it's the same people. And it depends on really what the case is, but maybe it could be according to a specific user trait, a specific type of complaint, or whatever it is. But really get that out of the way, and use simple tooling or complicated tooling depending what you have in place, and really be able to get that out of the way and look at the other stuff. And really, there's a lot of ways to do that. But the point is, even if you have a lot of noise, get it out of the way. You can do the analysis, and that may require different levels of sophistication in getting to that end result. But you can do that, and then you'll find that after you move the noise, there's actually really useful stuff. And the third way to address this, and this will also, this will be something that will serve us really across the board, is correlate it with the observed behavior, right? I'm sure, like I said, probably everyone here has some kind of in product or in app analytics, things like whether it's like Google Analytics or Mixpanel or Amplitude and so forth. So many great solutions out there. And correlating between that and the feedbacks is something that is actually, I would say, not at all often done. It's pretty rare actually that product managers do that. And if you're doing that, way to go, because I talk to a lot of product managers and it's not common at all. But when you see when you look at the analytics, obviously you see the observed truth, where you see what people are actually doing. But if you look at the kind of feedbacks that you're getting and the points in time that you're getting them, if you see spikes in specific things, right? People, oh, they complain about this thing at a specific point in time, or after this release that we made, or after this, let's say if you're in gaming, so there's like live ops and there's like or different things in different types of products that maybe you've had a special kind of special release or a change that you made for a period of time or whatever it is, and you can correlate what you observe in your analytics with what people are saying, right? And it can give you the reasons behind the behavior, right? You see the behavior, you don't know what happened, but looking at the feedback, you can understand more. So this is also a way to kind of sift through all this data, all this noise, and get to something that is beyond what perhaps a small group of users might be saying. So now for the second big reason why user is too easy to ignore, right? And that is pretty much the idea that, hey, it's nothing new. We know, the pricing. Yeah, the pricing. You don't like paying. Nobody likes paying. I don't like paying. Nobody likes ads. I don't like ads. That's not signal. That's not signal, and you can ignore it. And yes, that's true. People will always complain about certain things. And here the way to address it is, um, you know, uh, threefold, and some of these are kind of also continuing what we just talked, but some of these are a bit different. So one, you want to have some tooling in place, and like I said, you see here that's kind of a screenshot of our product, but it's really not about that. You could, like I said, very real. You can use Google Spreadsheets. You could use Airtable. You could use any kind of product that works for you. And today there's really great ones. But if you can filter the type of things that are always repeating, right? Okay, people are always complaining about the ads. People are always complaining about the in-app purchase. People are always complaining about our price points, whatever it is. Filter that out, right? You want to have a tool that allows you to filter things out in an intelligent way. Maybe it's some semantics, some linguistic analysis, or maybe just keywords. You're doing it in Google spreadsheets, and you're filtering those keywords out, and you're getting 80% of the value, and you're getting it for free. That's great too. Just get it out of the way and look at the other stuff, right? And because a lot of the times, and I know it sounds simplistic, but this is reality. A lot of people just like, yeah, I go and I read the App Store reviews, and that's what I get. Okay, that's very nice because a lot of people don't actually read all the reviews, especially for products that have hundreds and thousands and more. For a big consumer product, you would have huge amounts of reviews, and reading through them is actually not easy. But that's why, yeah, you can get that data, get it off to whatever works for you, and filter that out. Get the things that are repetitive out of the way, or even the things that you expect. Right? I don't want to hear about the ads. I know that we have annoying ads. Let's see what other things people are saying. So that's the first point. Now, the second point is really about the volume, right? Because the thing is, yes, people complain about those things that I mentioned about the ads, right? Let's take it as an example. So sure, they will always complain about it, but the way they complain about it, and especially the volume, which is an easy one, that can change. And sometimes, maybe you switch to a different ad provider, right? Or your ad provider added a new type of ad unit to the mix, or some kind of new advertiser, or you have filtering in place for specific um, categories of advertising, but some new ad that of course it's not like you're selling the ad, you're working with some providers, right? For many companies, so maybe a new type of ad or a new advertiser somehow got around the filtering. They actually have something that you feel, hey, that should be only really displayed to that should not be shown to kids, but somehow they got over the filtering, and your product also has kids as users, which is of course very, very sensitive. So those things are actually very important to track, right? You want to see the volume, you want to see if something new is coming up within that same theme. And that is actually the danger of ignoring things that are, hey, people are always complaining about that. Because there could be changes about it, right? Like things change, and you want to see, sure, people always complain about the ads, but after this last release or after this such and such date, suddenly the volume spiked and it's like 3 times as much. Let's look into it. It's worth looking into it because probably there's something that happened, right? The ads are way more annoying, whatever it may be. So really looking at the trend, even if it's like an obvious thing that people always say, that can really teach you a lot. And again, that's very easy to do, right? Even if you, like I said, take all the data, put it on a Google spreadsheet or whatever you want to use, graph it out, and you'll see, oh, look at that, this weird spike. what did happen here? We didn't do anything, but something happened, right? Look at that, whatever. Google, like there's a new advertiser, there's a new ad unit, whatever it may be. So that can be very, very useful. And the third thing, and this is, repeating what we said earlier, but here too, correlating it with observed behavior, right? You want to see if those things that people complain about, especially it's like ebbs and flows, there's trends and things like that. You want to see if, for example, look at your cohort analysis, your retention. Is it being affected? Do you see some correlation between the volume of this like repetitive thing that people are always complaining about? Does it at all correlate with engagement, with cohorts that are more retaining or not? And again, it sounds simple, but it's not so often done, and it's not hard to do. You just need to have the data, have the right tooling in place, and have it as part of your process. So it's definitely something that can be done. And looking at that, looking at the observed behavior and the feedbacks can really teach you a lot. And really, the third big reason is, it's all fluff, right? Blah blah blah. So much noise, so much things that are pretty much useless or meaningless, and you have to go through so much stuff to get something that is really meaningful. And even if it's meaningful, it doesn't really necessarily represent anyone. It's not. It's getting hard. It's very hard to get statistical validity with that sort of data. So that is also, like I said, very real pain point. So how do you address that? So first thing, and yeah, this is also about having some kind of tooling in place, having some kind of process in place, right? But here you want to really be a bit more rigorous. You want to have the statistics. You want to be able to look at things and see if specific patterns, specific things are repeating in certain ways. Go kind of beyond the fluff, beyond the blobs of text that people are maybe posting, and try to look for specific semantic themes, for specific keywords, for specific things that are repeating, for something that maybe kind of goes above a certain threshold. And it's very hard if you have millions of reviews, which obviously some consumer products have. It's not like you're going to read it all. So that's why it's like get a feeling, okay, it's fluff. So you want to have some sort of way to, and here, it can get really sophisticated, right? Maybe you do some clustering, maybe you do some semantic analysis, but maybe, you do something super simple. You look at a few keywords, and sure, some people may talk about the same thing, but use a different keyword, and it's okay. You have enough data. So even if you use very simple keyword search, in a Google spreadsheet, like I said, and graph it out, see what's coming up, and you can really identify those things that are beyond the fluff, that really indicate some kind of trend, indicate something that you may want to pay attention to. So really hope in this short conversation, we kind of managed to show how you can take user feedback, you can take customer feedback and incorporate into what you do, right? But I want to make it very real. I want to, to be useful. I want to really have something actionable that we could do. So what's next? What can we do as a follow-up to that, right? And the first thing I'd say, incorporate some kind of user feedback processing into your iteration planning, right? And I intentionally say iteration planning. It doesn't have to be that, but I think what we want to avoid is saying something which actually happens a lot is like, okay, once, when we do our quarterly planning or something, we're gonna see, you're gonna also incorporate user feedback and see if it's something meaningful there, right? And that kind of goes back into what I was discussing earlier about that user feedback does not belong solely in one bucket of what a product manager takes into account or does. It really takes part in everything. It can affect everything. It's from optimizing that certain thing that causes people to churn to aligning with the company's mission. So it's a really small grain stuff, and also, kind of the very big stones that we want to make sure that we have in the right place. And I think the way to incorporate it and the way to make it into a real utility is have it really as something to do frequently enough. Now, it needs to be easy. It can't be too heavy, but that's a problem. Sometimes companies have really heavy processes. They have some textual analysis tools, and you have to feed them tons of data, and you get some kind of report, or you have 5 analysts working on it. It's like you do it once every blue moon, and it doesn't really affect much, right? Right? It's so the idea is do something light, do something easy that you can do frequently enough in order to actually affect your decisions. And more than that, if you are exposed to the themes, to the insights from user feedback frequently enough, your mind will also be shaped by that, right? You'll have a better understanding, better intuitive understanding of your users and what might be bothering them, and you'll see things repeating. So really, I can't stress this enough. Hopefully I pass this message along. Do it in something that is maybe easy, maybe simple, maybe even stupid, but you can do frequently enough. So that's the first thing that I would say. Uh, the second thing is really, the rubber needs to meet the road, right? Take a couple of things that we discussed and apply them. It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe you only take, you're not gonna listen to this community that you have. You're only gonna look at reviews, or you're gonna only talk, only maybe take your community, or something that it doesn't have to be perfect. Even if it's one source, maybe you're not looking at everything. Maybe you're looking at only a specific subset of things that are accessible to you. It's all good, but something you can start with. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's a great place to be. And the third thing is really to think about that aspect of how do I shape the feedback channels? How do I shape the entire experience around the product of people sharing, conversing, helping other users perhaps, and sharing feedback with me? So it's more useful, but yeah, I use the word wholesome, right? And why wholesome? I think, and this is, we could talk about that a lot. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I think it's very important nowadays. And a lot of smart companies we see are very much thinking about how do you create a user community that is wholesome, right? Avoiding toxicity. Like fighting toxicity is very important. The online space, anyone who spends some time online can see it's so toxic, right? And probably if you have a product with a meaningful user base, it may be present there as well. And I think it's on us as product managers to also think, how do we structure engagement and interaction, who gets a voice in a way that creates a welcoming community? Because how people are experiencing your community, their fellow users, is also part of the product. So these are three things that I hope are useful and actionable enough that you can do. Like building a community, very easy. Maybe you want to start a Discord server. Maybe you want to incorporate a feedback channel. A lot of ways that really you can act on that. And I think this is it. So hopefully, if there are any questions, happy to answer that. And I thank everyone for joining.
Great, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, because I know all too often how you kind of get that people just dismissing the law of small numbers, like where you've only got 10 people saying something or 6 people. So no, that was really helpful. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Of course.
We do actually, we're out of time. There was one question that came in just about how, so the one objection they continuously get is, well, I know what's needed. So it's not even that the research, the problems with the research, is just we don't need it at all in the first place, because yeah, it's kind of, we already know. We are out of time. So what I'll do is I'll invite you to the Slack channel. I'll post that question in the Slack channel, and if you could come and answer it there, that would be fantastic.
Of course. We'd love to.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Itamar.